Hello, my name's Libby Hill, and I'm a speech and language therapist who works with many children and young people who have PDA. And I'm going to talk to you about verbal equalising behaviour today. So, I am a curious clinician. I think when we're working in areas where we haven't got the research to back up what we're finding, we have a duty to be a curious clinician. So I've got three areas of interest around PDA: the social communication, language profiles of PDAs, and the equalising behaviour. Now, I think equalising behaviour ought to be on the list of factors that we look for when we're deciding whether somebody has PDA or not, because for me, it's a really important feature and it will be there somewhere. So what are equalising behaviours? It's also called levelling, and it's a set of instinctive actions that restore a sense of parity and personal autonomy. So whenever a situation feels unfair or hierarchical, or the personal autonomy is being threatened, the nervous system detects this imbalance of power. The anxiety spikes, and the equalising behaviour that they do then flattens out this hierarchy so the PDA can feel safe and in control again. So it's not spite, it's not manipulation, it's an automatic self-protection response to perceived threat or injustice. And I see it such a lot. I see it in several different domains. So I see it where they might be using role play and imagination. So they might be insisting that the adult becomes the baby, or they're always the boss, they're always the mom. You've got to toe the line and be somebody else. They might create rules for the game, but they'll change them as they go along to suit themselves. They might sit in the grown-up's chair as a physical leveler. They might use the TV remote and own that. There might be little twists in the demand avoidance. They might use joking or forgetting. There might be justice seeking in the equalising behaviour, so the fairness is very important to them. There might be internalized equalising. So that could be include a lot of factors: meltdowns, rigidity, perfectionism. And in teenagers or adults, you see challenging workplace hierarchy, or ignoring job titles, preferring places where they haven't got that hierarchy. So that's really important. But the bit that I'm really interested in is how they use language as an equalising behaviour. So what I've done over the years when I've been jotting down examples, I have put them into different categories, and I find they tend to fall into 5 categories. So there's intellectual one-upmanship, mocking authority, bringing adults down to their level, role reversal, or the shock factor. So intellectual one-upmanship. So if somebody tries to explain something, they might interrupt with more knowledge, or they might challenge that person's expertise. So Anayans in 2018 noted that individuals with PDA often exhibit verbal fluency and argumentative reasoning, especially when avoiding demands. So what does that look like? Well, this is a good example of Mohammed. You'll love Mohammed at the end of this. So setting is a year 3 classroom, and it's a history lesson. And the teacher said, "In history today, we'll learn about ancient Egypt." Mohammed says, "Actually, the pyramids weren't built by slaves. Historians prove that already." Or Elliot, age 10. So this is a year 6 classroom. And the teacher introduced the topic as ratios. So the teacher said, "We're going to look at simple ratios like 2 to 1. Elliot says, "Actually, That's a basic form of proportional reasoning. Did you know the ancient Greeks used ratios in architecture? The Parthenon is designed around a golden ratio, 1.618, not just 2 to 1. The teacher, slightly taken aback. Well, that's interesting, Elliot. Elliot, it's more than interesting. It's mathematically and aesthetically significant. I don't think this worksheet really captures that because I'm trying not to laugh. Second one, mocking authority. Now, this can be where they use sarcasm, humour, or exaggerated politeness to challenge authority figures. It's almost, as Green puts it, theatrical resistance, but it is a form of control, but not necessarily disrespect. I have it again. One-to-one session with a teacher in a small room. I was there as well. Teacher says, "It's lunchtime now." Mohammed said, "Oh, yes, of course, Your Majesty. Let me just fetch my royal lunchbox." And Tala, 13, secondary school nurture group, and the adult was reminding the students to finish their work quietly. So she said, "Let's try to keep the noise down and get that worksheet finished." Talia, in an overly formal, exaggerated tone, "Yes, Supreme Overlord of Worksheets, your wish is my command. Shall I kneel before completing section 5? Obviously, the other students laughed. I tried not to. And the adult, very calm she was smiling. She said, "No need for kneeling, Talia. Just give question 5 your best shot," which was a perfect response at the time. The next one is role reversal. So this is where the child acts as the authority. So instead of being under somebody's authority, they may act as though they're the ones in charge. So Milton in 2013 described how autistic individuals with a PDA profile often use subversion of roles as a coping strategy when managing stress. I have it again. Year 3 classroom. "You need to focus on your work," says the teacher. Mohammed, "Ah, but have you completed all your work today, miss? Let's talk about your progress." Kai, year 9 classroom. The teacher's trying to encourage students to settle and begin a group discussion activity. "Right, everyone, let's get started. You've got 5 minutes to discuss the topic with your group." Kai stands up, claps his hands and says, "Okay, team, you heard the lady. Phones away, mouth shut, brains on. I want results, people." And then he turns to the teacher with a grin and says, "Just trying to support your leadership, miss." I mean, there's no way she could be cross with him, is there? It's also bringing adults down to their level. So instead of seeing adults as authority figures, they may treat them like peers, using informal or even teasing language. So this is Riley, 15, an alternative provision classroom, and the key worker reminds the students that it's time to head to their next lesson. So she says, "All right, folks, pack up now. We've got to move on." Riley, grinning with a mock serious expression on his face, says, "Oh, do we have to? You're such a fun sponge today. What happened? Did you run out of coffee or just get out of the wrong side of bed?" Key worker said, "Neither. I'm just trying to keep us on track." Riley, "You sound like my nan. Want me to get you a cardigan and some slippers?" I didn't laugh, but I wanted to. Laura, 16, alternative provision again. Adult says, "Come on, time to go." Laura says, "Chill, ducky, what's the rush? Don't get your knickers in a twist." I did laugh. I'm sorry. There might be teasing or banter to set the boundaries. So they might joke or mimic or push buttons playfully to see how much flexibility and control they have. So Leo, age 9, it was a primary school classroom, and the teaching assistant was supporting a small group, including Leo, during a maths lesson. So she says, "Okay, Leo, let's finish the last 2 questions and then we can have a break." Leo's smirking. "Ooh, bossy today, aren't we? What happens if I only do 1? Will you cry or will you send me to the dungeon?" Teaching assistant very calmly said, "No dungeon today. Just trying to help you finish so you can get your break. Leo grinning. You're all right, miss. Bit strict, but I'll let you off. And John 14, art lesson in a specialist independent school. Teacher, I need you to sit down now. You've been walking around, pacing around basically. And John laughed and he said, I need £1 million, but we don't always get what we want, do we? And then there's the shock factor. And this is still part of trying to shift the power dynamics. I see this a lot in initial assessments. So they've come into the session, I've used all the right low arousal approaches. I've let them choose the order of the slides, of the activities. I've really done my best to try and set the scene. Everything's low demand. So they've gone along with what I've wanted to. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, hang on a minute. I'm doing what she wants. I'm complying. Hang on. And then they come out with whatever they come out with. So Ava, 15, the teacher asks the students to open their books and begin a writing task. So she says, okay, everyone, quiet now. Let's get started on the essay from yesterday. Ava, loudly from the back of the room, oh, do we have to? I'd rather set my hair on fire than write this boring essay. Teacher pauses. Let's try to stay appropriate, Ava. Ava, without missing a beat, fine. I'll just write about how school is slowly killing my soul instead. Same thing, right? And many, many, many in my first sessions will say things like, I'm not doing your stupid activity and you can't make me. Or, did you know you're fat? You're the ugliest person I've ever met. Bet you got bullied at school with teeth like that. And while some of those comments could be hurtful, they're strategic, they're not malicious. They want me to be highly offended by what they've said and then say, that's it, then we're not doing this. But of course, I never do. So, somebody said to me the other day, Libby, do you know you're really old and you're really ugly? And I said, I know, but I can't help it. And they're like, oh, okay. And then they were trying to think what else they might be able to say to shock me into saying, that's it. That's the end of it. We're not doing it. But I'm never going to do that. Because these behaviours are not about defiance. They're about maintaining autonomy. So the best approach is to avoid the power struggles, work with their need for control. Gill et al. In 2020 found that many parents describe their child's challenging behaviour as a response to perceived control rather than a desire to disrupt. And understanding why PDAs challenge authority or social hierarchies can help adults respond in a way that builds trust rather than creating more resistance. All those examples that I gave you, can you imagine what a typical reaction might be in a classroom situation where compliance is what is demanded from all the children in the class? But it wouldn't have worked. So the key points to remember, it's anxiety driven, it is not naughty. So this behaviour exists to relieve anxiety. They want to restore control. So traditional discipline or consequences can escalate rather than resolve that situation. Power dynamics are the trigger. So even well-meant praise delivered in a top-down approach, good girl, sit nicely, can feel unequal and spark levelling. But equaling can be external or it can be internal. So some PDAs will push back on other people. Others push strict rules onto themselves. But we have to remember that levelling isn't forever, because once equilibrium and this feeling of safety returns, then the PDA can relax and cooperate, if that's what it looks like, again. So what strategies are useful? Well, we need to collaborate early. So we need to make sure that we're offering genuine choices. It really is shared problem solving. The power needs to feel shared. We're in it together. We can use playful inversion, so we can get the child to be taking the lead. They can be the captain or, however it needs to be. So Amanda Dykman's got some tips on that. We've got to validate the fairness lens. Got to acknowledge it feels unfair when, but rather than dismissing the concern. Keep instructions level toned. Don't get heavy handed. Neutral language. Doing things together lands much better than commands. And we need to plan outlets for mastery where they can be much better than us. They can be in charge. So board games, creative projects, or leadership roles in safe settings can meet that equalising need proactively. But what we have to do is look at the patterns, and we have to really understand why the person is doing what they're doing. Because if we understand what's behind it, we can respond accordingly. So I was just telling somebody earlier on about a session. I was doing a joint assessment session. It was a review session. We'd already met the child before, and it was with an OT that I work with a lot. So we were actually at her place, and the girl was an hour late, and then I needed half an hour to get into the session from the car. And so Alison was in the ball pit, and I was sitting on the edge of the ball pit. And Millie came in, and immediately we were relaxed. So she looked fairly relaxed by the time she'd actually come in. She went straight into the ball pit, started to play. And obviously I was asking her questions. Alison was asking her questions. We were having a good chat. We were getting everything we needed out of that. And then she realised what was happening. So she really put the brakes on. And she started to yell at me and say that my feet were absolutely disgusting, and I was disgusting, and all sorts of name calling in there because I got my feet up and whatever. And then she turned to the OT, and she obviously couldn't think of something quick enough. So she said, and you look just like Hugh Grant. But it wasn't being horrible. It wasn't being malicious in any way, shape, or form. She needed to regain her feeling of control. And once it was back, and we'd apologised profusely, although I'm not quite sure what Alison could do because she felt she looked like Hugh Grant, but I apologised profusely for having my feet up, and I promised I wouldn't do it again. We moved on. There was no issue. I didn't take offence that she'd sworn, shouted at me, called me all sorts of things, because there was no offence to be taken. It was a verbal equalising behaviour. And there's one with equalising behaviour that will be the one that I remember the best. And his parents don't mind me talking about this, by the way. I'll call him John. And in 2015, I went to his house. I knew he'd got PDA. I was doing all the usual strategies. He was choosing what we did, but I managed to do a full language and communication assessment with him. So I was really pleased. And then I blew it. I didn't give him any autonomy about when the session ended. It was half term, and someone was looking after my children at home. And so when I'd finished what I needed to do, I shut my laptop and I said, "Oh, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. Right, I really need to go now." And he said, "You can't go yet." And he was looking around. "You can't go yet. You can't go yet." And I could see his anxiety rising because he was realizing he wasn't in any control about this situation. And he said, "You can't go yet. You can't go yet. Can't go yet." And his dad walked into the kitchen where we were, and he said, "You can't go yet because you haven't had sex with my dad." And I responded in a very low arousal approach, "Oh, that's a lovely offer, thank you, but I've really got to go." And then I was so worried because I thought my response had been inappropriate. So I rang his mum later and said, I'm so sorry I said that. And she's, no, that was a perfect thing to say because it de-escalated it straight away. Whereas if you'd said, oh, that's disgusting, or anything other than that, it would have escalated. But I understood what was behind it. And I was the one who put him in that situation. So he was quite right to be cross with me. So thank you for listening about equalising behaviours using language. The more we know about PDA, the more we learn about PDA, the more fascinating we realise it is. So any questions, just let me know. Thank you.
You're so good at talking, Aurora.